Su Ru burst into laughter and said, "Oh, my Tia senior brother, 300 years ago, when you participated in the 7 sex competition, you only made it to the top 4, and you still wanted to defeat senior brother Wan." Tia Bai was caught off guard by his wife's teasing, his face showing some embarrassment. "Well, that was because ... at that time, I was thinking about the night before the competition, I went to see you, and I didn't have any energy left when it came time for the competition, pa." Su Ru spat, but her face flushed slightly, looking tenderly at the man in front of her. Senior brother Wen had extraordinary talents and intelligence. Among our disciples of the same generation, except for senior brother ZhuXian, no one could match him in Taoist cultivation. What about you? Entering the top 4 was already enough to make your master laugh so hard he couldn't close his mouth. Yet you still wanted to defeat senior brother Wan. Tia Bai chuckled, his mood evidently improving. "Senior brother Wan is indeed far superior to me, but you chose me between him and me back then. It shows that I must have had something better than him." Su Ru gave him a glance. "I was blinded and confused back then to follow you." Tia Bai didn't get angry after hearing her words, just looked at his wife, chuckling, his eyes full of laughter. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed Su Ru's boneless hand. Su Ru glared at him, whispering, "We're so old. Why are you being so cheesy? Besides, Xiaofan will be here soon. What if he sees us like this?" Tia Bai just smiled and didn't say anything. He looked at his wife, his eyes full of warmth. Suddenly, he held her hand tighter. The night was quiet, and there was no one around. The cool night breeze gently blew, rustling the leaves in the night. In the woods, it was peaceful. After a while, Su Ru suddenly said, "Actually, I feel that Xiaofan's current appearance is somewhat similar to how you were back then." As she said this, she raised her head and looked at Tia Bai. "Have you noticed it yourself?" Tia Bai was taken aback for a moment. "Really?" Su Ru smiled and said, "What's with that expression? Back then, you seemed a bit foolish too. Everyone thought you couldn't compare to those ambitious brothers. But, in the end, among the disciples of Deju Peak, you achieved the greatest success and the highest level of Taoist cultivation. Your master even passed on the position of the head to you." Tia Bai snorted. "That's called being reserved, not foolish." Su Ru burst into laughter and said, "Oh, my Tia senior brother, you've grown old, and your skin has thickened a lot. I really don't know what to do with you." She paused for a moment and continued, "But speaking of Xiaofan, I don't believe you haven't noticed. Based on his performance in the past year or two, although he may not be as talented as Lin Jingyu or Lu Zwecki, he's not a fool. I think he's at least above average. It's just that in the past few years, he has been neglected by you, which made him feel inferior. That's why he appears awkward and clumsy." As she spoke, Su Ru seemed to remember something and fell silent for a moment before saying, "But what I've always been puzzled about is, how could it take him 3 times longer than an ordinary person to cultivate the most basic first-level Taoist techniques, Tai Chi Chuan Qing Dao?" Tia Bai shook his head, sighed, and then said with a sigh of relief, "There's no need to think about it now. When Xiaofan comes later, I'll ask him properly about what he's been up to these days. If he's done anything we don't know about." Su Ru glanced at him and said, "Then don't scare him when he comes later. If you frighten him before he even speaks, he won't be able to say anything." Tia Bai snorted. "I don't know why, but sometimes when I look at him like that, I feel a bit annoyed." Su Ru smiled and said, "Actually, you just want your most promising disciple to do better. Not only do you want him to make further progress in Taoist cultivation, but you also want him to handle things like Cha Hao and Ziyakai in daily life. So that in the future ... double quotes." She sighed softly and stopped talking. Tia Bai fell silent for a moment and then said, "What's wrong?" Su Ru looked at him, seeming hesitant for a moment before saying, "Not easy with your temperament. After so many years, I've never seen you change like senior brother Wen did back then. So ... double quotes." Tia Bai remained silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I know what you mean. There's no need to say it." Su Ru looked at him for a long time before suddenly smiling and saying, If Xiaofan knew that his father, who has always looked down on him, actually had the highest expectations for him, I wonder how happy he would be. Pia Bai snorted and said disdainfully, turning his head away. With his stupid appearance, he still thinks I have the highest expectations for him. Don't dream. So are you? Looked at him with a smile, feeling the warmth and broadness of his hand holding hers, as if the 300 years had not changed at all. Quietly, she also held his hand tightly. Zhang Xiaofan and Song Darensu left the place where Shai To and their master, Daily Zundali, lived and started walking back. In their ears, it seemed as if Shai Tu's hearty laughter was still echoing along the way as the night grew deeper. Except for a few disciples on night duty, everyone slowly made their way back to their dwellings. As they were about to reach the cave where they lived on Dazhufeng, Song Darensu felt a bit uneasy. He turned around and said to Zhang Xiaofan, "Xiaofan, do you remember what I just told you?" Zhang Xiaofan replied, "Yes, senior brother." Song Darensu nodded and said, "I don't know why our master wants to see you, but ever since he came back from senior brother ZhuXian, his brows have been furrowed." Fearing that something unpleasant might happen, Zhang Xiaofan remained silent. Feeling increasingly uneasy, he wondered if ZhuXian had told their master about the incident with the Ghost King and Bai Yao that day. If that was the case, when their master asked about it later, he wouldn't know how to explain. Seeing Zhang Xiaofan's silence, Song Darensu thought he might be afraid. He smiled and patted his shoulder, saying, "Xiaofan, there's no need to worry too much. Although our master appears strict, he cares deeply for us, his disciples." He paused, lowering his voice, and added, "But try not to act impulsively again. If you offend our master, we won't be able to plead for you." Zhang Xiaofan felt a warmth in his heart. He bit his lip and looked at Song Darensu, whispering, "Senior brother, I'm really sorry for how I acted towards you before. Please don't blame me." Song Darensu chuckled, reaching out to pat his head, and said, "Why bring that up? Let's hurry, so we don't keep our master waiting." But it's strange. Just a while ago the moon was shining brightly, and now these dark clouds have rolled in. The East Sea is indeed different from our central plains. Zhang Xiaofan looked up at the sky and indeed saw it had suddenly darkened. The moon, which had been bright moments ago, now struggled to shine through the thickening black clouds, casting a gloomy atmosphere. As they conversed, they had already returned. Song Darensu and Zhang Xiaofan stopped, hearing Tialinger and Dubishu's cheerful laughter coming from the cave. After a moment of silence, Zhang Xiaofan said to Song Darensu, "Senior brother, I think I'll go straight to the forest to find our master, instead of going inside." Song Darensu glanced at him, nodded, and said, "That's fine. Be careful walking in the forest in the dark, okay?" Zhang Xiaofan smiled, nodded, and headed towards the forest ahead.